Home canned pears may not be on your repertoire yet, but guess what? They're about to be because it's easy, it's fun, it's delicious, and it's a great way to enjoy what's ripe now later on in the year. Let's make some. When we get towards the end of summer into early fall, we know that it's pear time. And so these Bartlett pears are gorgeous. Look at them. And you can tell when a pear is getting nice and ripe because a Bartlett is gonna have a little bit more yellow color to it. We'll start showing some browning a little bit more. And you know what? Pears are delicious. If you pick a good pear, you don't want a grainy pear, so always taste them to make sure, because depending on the year, they can be more or less grainy. But when they're ripe and in season, you want to buy them, but then sometimes you maybe have too many, or you just want to be able to preserve a few and use them into the winter, and that's when we can pears. Now, growing up, Mom would can 20, 30 plus quart of pears, if not more. We don't need to do that anymore. We can for different reasons now, maybe just more of a novelty, maybe for fun, maybe for gifts, or maybe you are feeding a family and want to save some money, know where your food is coming from, and so you can do this method. So what we're doing here is canning pears. It's very basic, it's very simple, and it's a great thing to get into canning with because it's a pretty just easy, straightforward recipe. So what I have here are pears. I'm using Bartlett. You can use whatever pear you have ready, whether you have red Anjou, different types of pears. You just wanna make sure they're ripe and ready. So what do we wanna do before we even get the pears into jars is a light syrup. Now, this is a very light syrup, meaning for a ratio, we're using about 10% sugar to the water. Now, that is a very light syrup. You can also do medium syrups or heavy syrups. The sugar does do a few things to the pear. It preserves the color, it preserves the structure somewhat, and it obviously brings out the sweetness too. I use the lightest syrup ever, so it's like very minimal amount of sugar, and it just enhances the sweetness, keeps the color looking good, things like that. So what we're gonna do is take this over to the stove, and we're gonna let this light syrup kind of go over just some, a little bit of heat, let it come to a slow simmer, just because we wanna dissolve and really melt all that sugar. So what we have here are all of our pears. We have some water that I've acidulated with a little bit of lemon juice. So I just took some lemon, I squeezed it into here, and what that does is while I'm cutting, getting the peel off of the pears, getting the core out, slicing them into wedges, it keeps them from browning. And it's just making sure that color stays so when we can them, it has a nice color. Pears change color and brown really quickly. So what I'm doing is making sure I get all that skin off. Now, you could can them with the skin on, it just can be kind of tough. So it's more of a personal preference. But what I'm doing is, you can do it two ways. So I just like to cut them in half. And then if they're really big pears, which some of these are, I will then cut them maybe in thirds on that half. It just kind of depends. But then I'll pick one up and I'll just take my knife and cut out just as minimal amount of that inside as I can, the seeds, that little bit of stem, and then you can just, if they're nice and ripe, you can run your knife right along the flesh and the skin and get off that peel. So this is best when they're super ripe because the peel almost just wants to come off, and I find it much quicker. Now when we're coming and we're choosing things to can, like pears, whatever they are, and say you have a personal preference, like I like little pieces or I like different things, go ahead. You can take this pear and you could slice it up into pieces if you wanted to. We always, growing up, Mom kept them like this, because this is what, I think it's a Midwest thing, but we always had dessert pretty much with every meal. But it wasn't like cake always, it was not cookies, things like that. It was often this canned fruit. So Mom would go down and get something out of the pantry in the basement. So whether it was peaches, pears, apples, something like that, and that's what dessert would be. And so it would probably just suffice my sister and I to think we had dessert, and it was a great way to use it. Now you can also use these canned pears for baked goods, for items, just like if you would purchase canned pears for something, whether it's a cake, whether it's certain, recipes you use, you can do that still with these, and it will work just as well. So if this is to you a little hard to get the peel off, or if you feel like your pears are just not quite that kind of ripeness, and different varieties can be different, there is a quicker way, and it's just like we do with tomatoes. So you can take a pear. I'm just gonna take a bowl with me. I'm gonna take a slotted spoon, and I have my water bath water ready. So this is what we're gonna can the pears in later once we have them in jars. But what I have here is, it's lightly boiling, because I like to have it ready when I'm going. And you can just take a spoon, a slotted spoon, I think is easiest, put it down in that water for, I'm gonna say it's like anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds. So I'm gonna leave it here, and then we're gonna peel it. So once it's been in there, and it doesn't take long, you can do this with tomatoes, you can do this with peaches. You've probably seen it done before. But now we have this, it's a little warm, but my hands are used to it. So we're gonna cut it just like we did the other one. And again, this one I would say probably thirds roughly. And you can see already, as I'm cutting, do you see how that peel, it just wants to come off? See that? So if you do that really quickly in hot water that's kind of boiling like this, it will just slip off. So it's really a personal preference, kind of what you want your method to be. I don't think there's a right or wrong way. I think when it comes to canning, when it comes to being in the kitchen, I think you have to find what works for you and you have to find what you're comfortable with. Growing up, it would be grandma, mom, a lot of times me at the table, and we would just be peeling the raw ones, not dipping them in hot water. We would just be sitting there and paring them. That's paring fruit. And that worked great for us. But you know what? I wasn't always the best at it, I'll admit, as a child. So grandma would often look at mine and be like, Caleb, you're getting too much of the fruit. This is a way not to get like any of the fruit and just get the peel. So do what works for you. So I'm gonna keep doing this, filling this bowl up with all this gorgeous fruit of the season, and then we're gonna can them. I know, you're excited. So I always leave a few pears unpeeled and sliced just in case each pear, even though you go by pounds, it has less or more waste, so it will fill more or less jars, and that way I have a few that I can just do at the end if I need to. But when I'm going to fill jars, you can see what we're gonna do is just put the slices or the wedges, whatever you're doing, right in there. Now you can do a wide mouth jar or you can do a regular mouth jar. This is a regular mouth, which I have bigger hands, so actually a wide mouth jar could have worked a little bit better, but I'm doing regular mouth. And what we're gonna do is just start lining them up in there. These, you can tell, they're not gonna be perfectly packed and you can't pack them perfectly. But the thing is, if you do wanna do a little bit more careful placement, a wide mouth jar allows you maybe to get your hand down in it. If I can get my hand down in it, I think any of you could too. So this is really the simple part. This is called raw packing because we're putting them in cold. And you can also hot pack them where you cook them in the syrup. I like raw packing. I think it's actually just easier to get them in there, and I can kind of finesse them around this way too. If you need to and you feel like they're not working, just bang it on the bottom of your hand, just like I do if I'm doing green beans or something. That's what grandma always would do. And sometimes I'll put them in even like upside down because that point will maybe fit in somewhere a little bit better and wedge down in. You know, you're never gonna get it perfectly tight, and that's good. You don't wanna make pockets where the syrup isn't gonna get to. So what I'm gonna do is continue to fill these jars, pack them up, and we'll put the syrup on them, and we'll just can them. So while you're packing the jars, there are some people that love to put a cinnamon stick in it. You can do that. Put a cinnamon stick in with them so you have like a cinnamon nice like essence in with the pears. You can just put it in the jar with them while you're canning. For these, I just like to keep them straight pear. Just keep them as pears. Now at the top, you want to leave a 1/2 inch headspace. So that's the top. That's the space from the top of the rim to where the fruit and the liquid starts. Now my grandma though would always be very adamant that at the top, if you have little bits of space that you have to put things, cut up some pieces of pear to make sure you fill the jar properly, she would say. Now you don't need to necessarily do that. You can also just take your extra pear and keep it as a treat, which, right, pears. There's nothing like a good pear. So now what we want to do is fill it with our syrup mixture. So we put on a funnel to keep it as clean as possible, and we just ladle it on. And we do it rather slow because you want to make sure it's, you know, these aren't a tight pack, meaning there's lots of airspace around all these pears. So you don't have to worry too much about air bubbles or about this liquid not encasing everything. With certain canned items, you do want to take something in, release any air bubbles, like a long table knife. Your other knife you can go in, and if you see air bubbles, make sure they get out. These don't have a tight pack, so I'm not too worried about those. But then you do want to take a clean cloth with some hot water and just clean off that rim to make sure there's none of that sugar syrup, any pieces of pear, because that can inhibit a good seal. So we take our prepared lids and rings, sometimes called flats and rings, and we put them right on. We do it to fingertip tightness. It means just tight where you could go slightly more, but it would take a lot of effort, and you don't want to do that because it could buckle. So now is the fun part. We just can them. This is how easy this is. It's a process in the sense that there's steps and it takes a few steps, but it's easy steps and just takes a little bit of time. So we're gonna take this over here. This is why I like to have everything ready to go. My water is here, it was at a boil. So I'm gonna just turn it on high again. We're gonna set this right down, and then we're gonna use our jar lifter. And that's just so we don't have to get our hands in hot boiling water. We're gonna put these in, and the water should be displaced enough that it covers them all. If it doesn't, I always have a little bit of water in a hot tea kettle here beside me. So if I need to add more, I can do that. Because that's the important part too, is to make sure these are covered. This is a water bath, this isn't a pressure canner. So I need, you can tell, a little bit more water. So we're gonna do it until, see how it's coming up now? And they're coming up, up, up to the top. And now we're gonna let this come back to a boil, and we're gonna time it, and we'll be good to go. These have boiled now. And so I'm just taking them out. I set them on a rack just so, you know, air movement around them, and I just think it's easier for any drips that come off of them. I mean, look how, I think there's something so special and pretty about canned fruit, canned items. You know, I get it. We're not gonna necessarily probably can as much as our grandmas did, maybe even our moms, but if you know how to do this, it's a great art, but it's also just a great satisfactory thing to have. In the middle of winter, just 4 jars of these. Every so often, eat some and enjoy them. That's the best part. So now what we wanna do once we can something is let it sit for 24 hours undisturbed. Because you can see these are starting, they're not quite sealed yet, which is normal when you pull them out. But oh, did you hear that one? That one just went down in. What they do when they come out of the water, they slowly pull in and you'll see a little divot still, and all at once, pop, and they seal. That's when you know they're shelf stable. After 24 hours, and I've talked about this a lot in the past, after 24 hours, I take off the ring to ensure the seal is true. Sometimes you can have a false seal with a ring. So you take it off, make sure that that lid is tight, and if you want, you can put the ring back on and store them, or you leave them off. I always have way more lids than I have rings because I reuse the rings and later on canning. So it's up to you what you wanna do with those. But do you wanna know what they taste like? Let me tell you. I have some fresh pear here. That is exactly what those are gonna taste like. Sweet, slightly crisp, with that right flavor. These taste just like fresh. And since we did like the lightest syrup with a little bit of sweetness, they're not gonna be cloyingly sweet like some things that have a very heavy sugar syrup. These will keep nice color, they won't brown, they'll be beautiful with that little bit of sugar we added, but they will maintain their really good pear flavor, and that's what we want. So what do I hope you do with this? I hope you're inspired and excited to maybe try something you haven't done. Maybe it's canning. Maybe it's just doing it with family, because you know what? Canning is so much easier when you grab people together, get in the kitchen, all work together, can a few jars. It just seems more fun. So try it out, share this video around so you can hear that little ping too. Share it with friends, because guess what? If this isn't for you, it may be for someone else. If I can do it, anybody can do it. Check my website, wiseguy.com, for this recipe and process, and any of my others. They're all on there. And until next time, enjoy something in season and maybe find a way to enjoy it later on in the year.